Hello, everybody. I'm Jackie K. Cooper, and my guest today is the inimitable Marie Bostwick. And Marie, I'm so happy that we finally get to visually meet.
I am too. I feel like we've kind of like known each other, but we've never actually, and we still haven't been in the same room, but we're
Uh,
kind of virtually in the same room.
yes,
So that's good.
which is the next best thing.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and Marie is the author of Esme. Is it Esme? Is that
Esme, that's how
Esme
I say it.
Hill? Fail spectacularly.
Yes.
I was doing my research on you, and you have been at this writing game for a while.
Yeah, I have. I
I,
have. At
I
this
came
point,
to
I
the
have no
party.
other skill set.
I
So,
came to the party late
a little bit late. Yes.
because
Although
I
I,
hit restoration of Cia Fairchild, which I absolutely loved.
thank you.
And,
Thank you so
but
much.
but that was well into your career. Your career was booming. You
Oh
had
yeah, no, Esme Cahill failed spectacularly is, I believe, my 20th book, if you count my novellas. But it's I've been doing this a while.
and two of them have been made into movies.
Just one, only one.
Christmas,
Although if there's anybody out there who makes movies, I'm totally open to the experience. So feel free to call my agent.
but it was what was it? Christmas something.
Well, yes, that's hilarious. I had a book called The Second Sister,
Uh-huh.
and they made it into a Hallmark Hall of Fame movie in 2018, and they titled it Christmas Everlasting, which is very exciting. But Jackie, until Hallmark told me I had written a Christmas book, I didn't know it. So,
Surprise, surprise.
guys,
Marie, you have written a Christmas book.
Christmas was in it. So, but it was, I did not think of it as a Christmas book. And I believe we released it in March or something like that, as I recall. So it was fun, but it was a fun experience. That was a lot of fun.
Did they pretty much stick to your story?
Oh goodness, no.
Oh well, cash the check.
Oh, this is, you know what? This is it. No, I mean, they took a little slice of the story, but they did change a lot of things, like the relationship between the two sisters in my book was really quite fraught. And I am one of seven daughters, so I know about sister
Yeah.
relationships and how difficult they can be, though, even when you love each other. And in this, in the movie, the sisters just spent all their time braiding each other's hair, and they loved each other from the day they were born. And that's not how I wrote it. But as you say, they changed some things. They took just the love story, which was for me, I write women's fiction, so while there may be a love story element, it's generally not the most important thing, dramatic question in the book. And of course, in a Hallmark movie, it is. So, and I kind of knew that, but when my husband, I read the script and I was like, they changed it a lot. And my husband's so wise and wonderful, and he put his hands on my shoulders and looked deeply into my eyes and said, "Baby, the check cleared." And I was like,
Hmm.
yes.
Yep. Yep. I've,
Yep.
I've talked to other people, who've had, and they said, you've got to accept the fact that you've sold it and
Yep.
it's theirs.
Yeah.
And
But you know what? It was fun. It was a wonderful movie, and I loved the experience. And there was one moment when my husband and I were watching. We get a thing, so we got to see it before all of
oh yeah,
America did, and we watched it. And we're sitting there watching, and there was this one very wonderful scene when my main character and her love interest are standing on this covered bridge. There was no covered bridge in the book, but okay, and having this conversation that was really good. And my husband was like, baby, you could have written that. And I looked over him and went, I did.
well, before we get into the writing and everything, I was
Yeah.
fascinated though, again, doing research, and in everything I read about you, it said like you had lived in 18 cities at 18 different times.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, when you are in the witness protection program, Jackie,
Oh yes, they moved you.
no, no. You know what? We've just moved a lot, mostly for my husband's work over the years. He is my rock, but he is a man who likes a new challenge. And so
Okay.
we do that a lot. Unfortunately, being a writer, in some ways, I may have become a writer because it was like the only way I could have a career. I could just take it wherever. But it sure, and moving that often, and we have actually lived in 10 different states. And we have lived in Mexico too, in 2 different
wow.
states. In Mexico, we did about almost 5 years there. And I've had, within those states, we've had way more than 20 addresses in our marriage. I think it's about 25. But it turns out to be the ideal resume for a writer because I can write and do write about any region of the country.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you because you've written the 2 books of yours that I've read. Restoration took place in Charleston, which is one of my all-time favorite cities. And then Esme takes place at Nashville, another one of my favorite cities. Did you live in either one of those?
I did not live in either one of them, but I lived in
You
Albany,
seem so familiar
Georgia.
with them.
Well, I spent time there. I lived in Albany, Georgia.
Okay.
As you have
That's
to say
close to
not
me.
Albany, it's Albany.
Yep.
So I lived there.
I live right above there in Houston County, which should be Houston County, but it's pronounced Houston County.
Well, right. That's how, every region has that. That's how we know if people are not from here. Like people who say Oregon, yeah, not from here. So, or the Willamette Valley, that would be Willamette. So, that's how we know. It's all right. But no, I lived in Georgia and kind of fell in love with the South. I've also lived in Texas, but when I see a wonderful city with a lot of character, I mean, some people, especially after Celia, they were like, well, why would you write about Charleston if you haven't lived here? My answer to that is if you're a writer and you've been to Charleston, how could you not write about Charleston?
And you captured it. So to me, I never lived in Charleston either, but I've visited a lot. That's if I were ever to move somewhere, I'd want to move to Charleston. But you got the atmosphere of Charleston.
I worked very hard at that.
Yeah. And you do the same thing with Asheville in Esme Cahill Fail Spectacularly. You get the essence of the area. And that's
I want to do that because one of the joys of reading is the ability to do a little armchair traveling, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, how many places do we end up going at some point because at some point earlier we read about it in a book and thought, oh, I want to go there, I want to visit there. So I hope that after reading my books, people who haven't been to Charleston or Asheville or Door County, Wisconsin, or any of the other places, or New England, places I've written about, will, want to make a trip.
What I found particularly appealing in the 2 books of yours that I've read, and I'm going to have to go back and find more now, but is the communities that you create.
Yeah.
A lot of authors try to do that and fail. Some authors do it spectacularly.
Thank
you can. And in both of those books, the community was just the essence of the book.
Yeah. No, that's a strong theme for me in virtually everything I've written. I love to have a big ensemble cast. It makes my job so much harder. Every time. Yeah, it does. Every time I read a book where there's like, what we call maybe a 2-hander, right? As in there's 2 central characters or maybe a 3-hander. And it seems like, and there's a central theme, and those books can be amazing. And when I read one that's done well, I think, man, I should do that. That seems like it would be so much easier. I start out trying to do that every time, and I seem to be virtually unable to do so. So I end up having the giant community with lots of characters and plots and subplots, and kind of what I think I read too much Dickens as a child is the problem, like Charles Dickens always had all these characters and they just move closer together and closer together as the book goes in until that circle is tight. And I kind of do the same thing, although not as well as Mr. Dickens.
Do you have to keep a board though and say, these are characteristics of this character, or is it just?
Oh, no, I know. They're real clear in my head when I'm writing.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I had for breakfast, but I know what all the characters had.
And you know what all the characters had for breakfast.
No, absolutely. I know everything about them. Yeah.
But now tell me this, Marie. Where did the germ of the ideas, like for Esme, where did that come from?
People ask me that so often about like, where do you get your ideas from? And the best thing I've been able to come up is it is magic. It's just, it just is there. I believe that ideas are kind of floating around asking for artists to grab hold of them. And that's what you do. And you just find them. And it can be, I cannot honestly remember exactly where the idea for Esme came, but because it's such a long process when from the time I get an idea to when a book is out, it can be years and years and years. Minimum, it's 2.
Oh, yeah.
More often, it's a lot longer than that. So I don't honestly remember where the original thought came in this book, but I am very interested, and it is something I write about people essentially dealing with, failure and setback and roadblocks and overcoming them, because that is just life, as near as I can tell. And boy, I can't be a cheerleader for everybody in America, but I sort of hope that through the books, people who are experiencing that time will, first of all, I just want people to be entertained. I mean, that's part of the story.
Right.
But I also think books come into people's hands at the moment they're supposed to have them. And I just know when I write a book now that somebody who's really been suffering a terrible setback or a feeling of failure is going to read this book, and it's going to give him the courage to get up off the mat and keep going.
Yeah, it's funny when you say it's just magic, because I don't write novels. I have nothing to do with fiction. I do write memoirs, but I've told people that there are times that you sit down, or I sit down and I'm not even aware of what I'm typing. Have you ever had that experience? It's like it just comes through me.
Well, I think I'm always aware of what I'm typing, but there's certainly moments when I'm in the zone. There are days when I sit down and it's like, I'm loaded, right?
Yeah.
There are days when I come into the office and I am loaded. And then there are days when I come into the office and it is like pulling teeth. Right. But sometimes you just, so I wrote a series of books called the Cobbled Court Quilt series. And there were 6 books in that series, and they were very popular. And there was a side character I loved named Mary Dell Templeton, but she was like an extra character, and she was from Texas, and she just kind of flitted in and out. She was so wonderful and funny and all the things. But she didn't. The books were set in Connecticut, and she wasn't there very much because there just isn't enough Dr. Pepper in Connecticut for Mary Dell to need to stay that long, right? I mean, she had to go back, and I had long wanted to write a book just for her, but I knew it had to be so special, and I just wasn't coming up with anything. Well, one day, Jackie, I got up, I woke up, and it was just there. And I went in my pajamas before coffee, which is saying a lot if you know me, to the computer, and I wrote an email to my agent. And the first line said, Mary Dell has a twin. And I sat and I wrote what essentially ended up being the entire, it was a more basic form, but it was essentially the entire outline for a book that was called Between Heaven and Texas, which was the first of my Too Much Texas books, which were the spinoffs. I wasn't having a dream. I was asleep and awake. And when I opened my eyes, I knew that Mary Dell had a twin. And that was the catalyst for everything.
It is magic.
It is magic.
Esme. Now, one thing, you talk about series of books. I would love to see the Celia Fairchild series. Yeah. I would love to see the Esme Cahill series, because you're still in the orbit of these characters when it has to end. And you're like, oh no, I want more. I
get that a lot.
I bet you do, because your characters, to me, are those who cause reactions. I mean, you can't be passive toward the characters you create.
No,
And
absolutely not.
and it's almost to a T. I mean, you have a large cast, and each one has a certain attraction that
Yep.
pulls you in. Now, Esme is the main around which these others orbit,
Right.
but each one is so unique. It's so
Well, and really here in some ways, because it's a story within the story structure. Esme is such a great character, but the story within the story is her grandmother. Now, I don't think of this book as really split time so much. I love split time books when they are well executed, but they are extraordinarily difficult to execute well. And how often have we read a split time novel and we are getting like way more involved in one storyline than the other, and we're doing that, right? I don't want that to happen with my books. I labored over every word, right? So I don't
have done that before. You would have like 3 time frames, and you think, okay, when are we going to get back to the
one that I'm really
one that
excited
I enjoy the most?
So this is much more, it's a story within the story. And in that we get Esme's grandmother's story, which is really, she's so interesting. I mean, Esme as a child, I think we're not very curious about the adults around them because children are naturally self-centered. That's how they survive, and that's okay. But so often if we run out of time and the people we love pass away, as adults, we're like, why didn't I ask this? Why didn't I ask that? Well, that's kind of where Esme is. And she starts to, when she ends up having to, she's an editor, and she loses her job in publishing, and her life gets turned upside down, and she's feeling like a spectacular failure, obviously. She goes back to Asheville and the Lakeside Lodge where she was raised by her grandparents, but her grandmother has passed away. So when she gets back, suddenly she starts seeing what might be visions. And she realizes that Adele has a story to tell, even from beyond the grave, and she expects Esme to tell it. And so this is how she delves into this and finds this whole side of her grandmother, that her grandmother was a really gifted but secretive artist and who never received her due. And so I just loved that. And for me, my favorite thing about this book is that while Esme is really charting her own path and trying to, like, her life has been detoured, but I really believe that sometimes failure is an opportunity. It's the on-ramp to the life we're supposed to live. And that's what Esme's going to find. But in the process of doing all that, she is going to get a chance to right an old wrong. And that is my favorite thing about this book. But there's so many great characters. There's Oscar, Oscar the Grouch in a way, right? He's this horrible, arrogant male writer.
This is just because of who I am. But to me, it's the relationship between Esme and her grandfather.
Yes. And George is wonderful.
Oh,
and George is just, so many people have fallen in love with George, He
is such a great character. And their relationship is just so great.
Yeah, it's very real. It's very real, And I never got George's grandfather. I wish I'd had. So my grandfathers were gone by the time I was cognizant or, of life. So he's the grandfather, but he is actually, I modeled him originally, although not very truthfully. So the inspiration for George came from my godfather, a man named Dave Burwell, who was really just larger than life in so many ways. And that's what I wanted George to be.
What George did for me was made me want to be the grandfather George was.
Yeah.
I have grandchildren, and I think, oh, that relationship, that's, and if we could all be like George,
and I think what's so strong about him is he's accepting of Esme, how she is.
Yes.
And even I think as a child, he really treated Esme as an equal. There's nothing condescending about George ever. And in some ways, I mean, he's definitely her grandfather and her inspiration and protector in a lot of ways, but they're also friends.
And she is of him. She is his protector.
No, that is true. That is true as that happens. So
it's that balance that's so great. So great.
Yeah.
All right, Marie, have you already started on the next book?
I am working, I have a bunch of ideas right now and I'm trying to sort through them.
Mhm.
So I can't really talk about anything just yet. But I'm I'm excited about some potential new directions and new stories and new ideas. So I just right now it's really a matter of saying, okay, what first?
Well, I don't know how much of the stuff you've seen that I do, but I have the stack of might read, not going to read, and positively going to read.
Yeah.
And your name has now made any book you write go into that positively
Thank you.
stack. Because I had a great time with both books. And, finding a new author is like finding buried treasure. And it's somebody that you know is consistently going to entertain you, and you certainly do.
Thank you.
I appreciate so much you taking the time to talk with us today.
Well, I
I
love
know you've
hanging
been
out
on
with
book
you.
tour and been very, very, very busy with the book
Yeah.
tour. And so I just wanted to wait and let you settle down and get a chance to talk to you.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, it was a fun book tour, but it was a little grueling, but every time you wake up in a hotel room and you think, oh, I just can't. And then you walk into a room and you meet such wonderful people and just, the energy. So I want to say to everybody out there who ever goes to not just anybody's author event. Oh, authors,
God bless you.
appreciate you so much. It means so much to all of us when people show up at our events. So way to go.
Go out and get Esme Cahill Fails Spectacularly by Marie Bostwick. It's you can take it from me, just allot some time because you're not going to want to stop once you start. So it was great. And thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Jackie. It's always good to talk to you.
We'll talk again soon. Thank you.
All right, sir.